Administration, and I'm delighted to welcome you here this evening for a noteworthy event. Triply important as an on-site lecture sponsored by the Leonard A. Lauder Research Center for Modern Art that helps mark the end of the long COVID pause of such in-person gatherings. The inaugural lecture by the new head of the center, Neil Cox, who officially joined the museum in April of this year, and a contribution to the museum's rich programming this season about Cubism, anchored by the recently opened exhibition, Cubism in the Trompe-l'oeil Tradition, curated by Emily Braun and Elizabeth Cowling. It couldn't feel like a more propitious and inspiring moment for the study of modern art at the Met. Neil Cox comes to us following a long career as professor of modern and contemporary art at the University of Edinburgh, and before that of art history and theory at the University of Essex. He's written extensively on Cubism and Picasso, including books in 2000 and 2010, and the wonderfully titled exhibition, Picasso Bestiary, in 1995. His essays have ranged from the topic of Picasso and Surrealism to work on Richard Serra's sculpture and drawing. In 2011, he curated the 19th and 20th century sections of an exhibition on still life, another connection here this season, In the Presence of Things, held at the Gulbenkian Museum in Lisbon. He has also spent decades fostering scholarship and mentoring young scholars through his work as director of postgraduate research students at the Edinburgh College of Art. And this is critical in his new role in the center, which supports fellows from the graduate level through more established scholars. Since its inception almost a decade ago, the center has been a lively and inspiriting place. And I want to take a moment here to thank Stephanie D'Alessandro, who's here this evening, the Leonard A. Lauder Curator of Modern Art and Senior Researcher in the Department of Modern and Contemporary Art, who more than ably guided the center during these last years. Now, Neil has brought both rigor and joie de vivre in equal measure to his first season of fellows and programming. Tonight, he will lecture on a Picasso sketchbook, Fantasy and Reality, examining in detail, through the deciphering of notes and analysis of drawings, a precious pocket-sized sketchbook known as Notebook number 26, that is part of the Leonard A. Lauder Cubist collection and was purchased and given to the museum by Mr. Lauder in celebration of the museum's 150th anniversary in 2020. Picasso developed the ideas in this sketchbook around 1913, but he kept it with him until his death. Later lectures sponsored by the center this fall will focus on the artist and poet Mina Loy, who was an important figure in the New York avant-garde world, admired by Duchamp, and on Paul Klee in a lecture entitled In the Magic Kitchen. We hope that you will enjoy this trio of lectures, bringing you new approaches and research on modern art. Now, please join me in welcoming Neil Cox.
I have to turn on my Madonna microphone. Thank you, Andrea, so much. I feel like you've done my talk now. And thanks everyone for coming in person this evening, and hello to everyone watching live online. Before I start, my warmest thanks above all to Mr. Lauder for his unstinting and extraordinary generous support for research on modern art at the Met, and for giving so much to the museum, including an amazing Picasso sketchbook. I have other people to thank. Emily Braun, who solved a mystery, actually through the power of her Googling, and Adri Kashur for advice about a Hungarian artist. Evelyn Furley at the Gallery Jean Crugier sent key information, and Cécile Godefroy and Johan Poplar gave me access to the Musée Picasso's Cubist sketchbooks. Special thanks to Rachel Mustalish, acting head of paper conservation, from whom I've learned so much. It's only water. And to world-leading Picasso expert Elizabeth Cowling, distinguished scholar in the Research Centre for Inspiring Conversations. I was going to say conservation, which would have sounded really weird. Okay. It's as good an evening as any to talk Picasso, since it's the artist's birthday. October the 25th, 1881, at 11:15 p.m. if you want to do his birth astrological chart. The object I shall explore with you was rarely exhibited or reproduced until it was sold at Sotheby's in New York in November 2019, coming to the museum, as Andrea said, as a wonderful gift from Mr. Lauder to celebrate the 150th anniversary of the museum. After the artist's death on 8th of April 1973, his granddaughter Marina Picasso received it after the settlement of the estate. The drawings in it have not been discussed in any depth to my knowledge. Somebody will tell me in a minute they have. Though it was exhibited in Geneva in 1986 and in Barcelona and New York in 1987, illustrated in the accompanying catalogues. Easily small enough to fit into any pocket when folded, its thin wove paper sheets are perforated for easy removal. A cheaply made object, now with grubby, faded covers. It was for the artist an intimate thing, eventually left in a drawer or studio corner when only half the sheets had been used, and never sent out into the world to be photographed or shown. On your seats, you will have found a card printed with this cover image. The card matches the exact dimensions of our object. It is an aid to help you to resist the impression of grandeur in the images of its pages that I'll show you on screen. You will have noticed that my lecture title calls it a sketchbook. Andrea pointed this out, whereas its official title is Notebook 26. Although this difference is the simple result of translating two different French terms for this kind of object, it points to the way in which our object is caught between two worlds, something I'll speak about as we go along. On the one hand, the reality of the modern artist's dependence on sales, on relationships with dealers and collectors, and on the other hand, the license or the necessity to invent fantastical objects and beings. To open this Picasso sketchbook is to invade a private playing out of tensions between reality and fantasy. As you'll see, the sketchbook performs this opposition, since Picasso used it very differently from each end. At the front end of the sketchbook are pragmatic notes of sales and income with calculations of bank balances. I'm calling this the front of the sketchbook because that's where the art shop has stamped its name in purple ink. You'll see as we go that I number the recto and verso of each sheet in the notebook from this front end. At the other end, there are 21 pencil drawings, followed by 5 ink drawings, and 1 further pencil drawing. The change from pencil to ink and back suggests that the drawings were not done in a single campaign on one day, and maybe were separated by months. Dating the lifespan of the notebook is straightforward, since Picasso has helpfully used it for financial record keeping. In his book Making Modernism of 1995, Michael Fitzgerald, who I think is teaching right now so can't be here, was the first to study and decode 2 opening pages in detail. On the right of this page is a list of sales dated January 1915 to GS, see if I can laser point, yes, this part I'm talking, oh, there, to GS or Gertrude Stein, to Léonce Rosenberg, and to André Level. On the left and larger column, Picasso mostly records income from his contract with his key Cubist dealer, Daniel Henri Kahnweiler, again with dates running from October the 15th, 1913 to June the 8th, 1914. I hope you're impressed that I can do American dates now. Plus a very singular amount from businessman and enthusiast for modern art, André Level, relating to an art speculation syndicate called the Peau de l'Ours, or bearskin. Level sent Picasso a cheque for 3,978 French francs and 85 centimes as his 1/5 share of income from the sale of works by the syndicate in March 1914, including The Family of Saltimbanque of 1905, now in Washington, sold to Heinrich Tannhauser for 12,650 francs. Incidentally, that 8th June amount, squeezed down the bottom, of 12,400 francs, is the last contractual payment that Kahnweiler was able to make to Picasso. Caught out on holiday in the Alps in Bavaria by the outbreak of war, Kahnweiler headed to Switzerland, then Italy, to avoid conscription in the German army. His absence from Paris meant in turn that, as a German national, the entire stock of his gallery was sequestered by the French state, eventually to be sold in a sequence of auctions in the early 1920s, incredibly important auctions for the future of Cubism. The next sheet is missing, torn out at the perforations, but sheet 3 recto has more dating information, January 1915 to January 1916. Here the sales notes in the small box on the right on the inside cover, so if I go back, that small box on the right, okay, go forward. The sales notes in the small box on the right on the inside cover are transcribed as the first 5 figures. Since we know those numbers include a payment for 8 drawings at around 200 francs each, it's just possible that the figures of 200 and 250 further down the list make up the 10 drawings, 10 dessins, identified in the box top right, just there. There is evidence in the form of visible impressions, you can probably see them in that slide, that the missing sheet 1 verso contained yet more calculations. We will photograph that in special light soon. The other sales amounts that make up an annual income of 25,050 French francs are not explained, though it's tempting to see the 2 consecutive amounts of 4,000 plus a 500 franc amount as related to the sale to dealer Léonce Rosenberg of the 1915 Harlequin, now in MoMA, together with another major picture underway and some unidentified watercolours of dancers, of all things, where an advance was agreed against them in November 1915. In any case, the total income for the year is 25,050 francs, a good amount, but as Fitzgerald points out, this was half the 51,500 francs total income from Kahnweiler alone in 1913. Maintaining income was important for Picasso's moves from a modest flat in Boulevard de Clichy, opposite Pigalle metro station, to ever larger premises in Montparnasse in the south. As a result, he pressured Kahnweiler for money still owed. In fact, after a run of blank pages and near the centre of the notebook, there are 2 further pages of banal financial data, including the latest date noted down anywhere in the sketchbook, August the 5th, 1916. Anxious to manage his wealth in a less secure situation during the war, Picasso tries to track his deposits against withdrawals in the summer months of that year, while in the process of another house move. In fact, I tried to understand all these things over here and how they relate to this, but my maths probably isn't good enough. Other people here will immediately be able to grasp it all. That he was making such an effort to record his financial position seems to have driven him to his fallback schoolboy lewdness too. What looks very much like a dripping penis is scrawled top left next to the art shop stamp on the inside cover page. Maybe it's me seeing that, but maybe you see something else. I've already mentioned one missing page of financial notations and impressions revealing what had been written on it. Picasso tore out no less than 15 sheets in different places in this notebook. But he probably did not do so just to throw them in the bin. Picasso hoarded every scrap of paper, not just drawings, but idle scribbles, bills, postcards, letters and their envelopes, press cuttings and musings. I hereby challenge you to spot sheets from our sketchbook hidden somewhere in Picasso's papier-collé. One sheet that was removed from the sketchbook had an address written on it. We know this because in scribbling the address, Picasso pressed hard enough, as was his wont, to leave a clear imprint on the neighbouring page. What we read is Picasso, 5 bis, Rue Chalcher, 14e. This is another date marker for the sketchbook, since Picasso and his then partner, Eva Goel, moved from Boulevard Raspail to 5B Rue Chalcher in the 14th arrondissement around early October 1913. So perhaps in the fall of 1913, Picasso wrote down this new address on the notebook page, tore it out at the perforation and handed it to some unknown acquaintance. Following Eva Goel's death from cancer on December the 14th, 1915, Picasso remained at Rue Chalcher until June or July 1916, just the moment when he is checking his bank balance again in the notebook. Around that time, he moved to the southern suburb of Montrouge. There is another address written down in the notebook or sketchbook, a trace of a little-known friendship. Pleasantly legible, it reads, 83 Rue de la Tombe Isidore, Bay Zobel. Picasso misspells the address, which should read Issoire, not Isidore. But who is Zobel? In Gertrude Stein's notebooks of 1903 to 12 for her work, The Making of the Americans, she offers this snide description of Alice B. Toklas, who would later become her life partner, with friends like that, as they say. This is what she says. A liar of the most sordid, unillumined, undramatic, unimaginative prostitute type, coward, ungenerous, conscienceless, mean, vulgarly triumphant and remorseless, caddish. In short, just plain rotten like Zobel. But not dangerous, not effective. No evil. Again, the name is written down phonetically and misspelt. Watch me do it in American. Z-O-B-E-L. The person Picasso and Stein meant was Bela Zobel, a Hungarian artist that Picasso had known since at least 1908. And that's him up there. An adept of fauve painting, Zobel featured after Picasso in American journalist Gellert Burgess's 1910 article, The Wild Men of Paris, famous among other things for this first published reproduction of Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. Zobel had attended the Académie Julian in 1903 and featured in the Salon d'Automne of 1905. He showed at the Independence and Berthoild's Gallery in 1908. Picasso's note of his address puts him still in Paris and not Amsterdam, as publications on him have it, sometime in the period 1913 to 16. I'll just have some more gin. One more note awaits us. It appears as an isolated fragment written in such a way as to defeat many a reader. Borat de tarde. Borate de tarde? What on earth could this mean, and in what language? In the end, I've come to think it says borat de soude, which is to say sodium borate. This chemical featured in happy-making throat lozenges in the epoch, along with cocaine. Sadly, these are no longer available. But it's also a known accelerator for developing photographs. We know that Picasso took photographs from around 1905 onwards, but we know little of his knowledge of processing them. This note suggests a conversation with someone who knew more about how to improve development and achieve better results. You need to buy some sodium borate, Pablo. He duly noted it down. Certainly, by 1913, Picasso was manipulating photographs in the darkroom, using cardboard masks to sculpt contact prints of his own photograph of the Boulevard Raspail construction with guitar player and violin. To return to the problem of missing pages, so far I've not been able to find any of them, except perhaps one. Even in a poor reproduction, the sheet is again notable for what seem to be blotches and transfers, and perhaps also imprints from another sheet that is missing, which would suggest that, if I'm right, that this is one of our missing sheets. It probably comes from the long sequence of 11 missing sheets from 24 recto to 28 recto inclusive. I don't have the dimensions for this thing, but it's possible, thanks to this technology, to see that its proportions and the perforations seem a plausible match. And I promise I didn't change the proportions when I did this. I believe the notes on the sheet were made on separate occasions, perhaps in ink, then in pencil. The inscription at the top, dated November 1914, seems to relate to works lent to Michael Brenner. He and Robert Cody were Kahnweiler's appointed agents in the US, running a gallery in Washington Square in New York, which put on a show of Picasso's works, probably including the Centre Pompidou's portrait of a young girl in December 1914. Perhaps Picasso was hoping to work directly with them following Kahnweiler's exile and the sequestration of his collection. Below the line is a detailed list of works lent to Germaine Bongard, a fashion designer who also ran a salon and showed contemporary work. Another trace of the complex exchange between fashion and modern art. It's been suggested by Hélène Sequel that the exhibition in question was the second one staged at Bongard's Rue de Penthièvre abode over March to April 1916. This fits insofar as we know that the portrait of Max Jacob mentioned is almost certainly the well-known Angresque drawing of a very early January 1915, and the Avignon man with a pipe may be this one, there are a whole bunch of them in fact, or another from the same series. If so, neither of them sold in that Bongard show. To recap, we know where Picasso bought this cheap notebook because the shop address is stamped on the inside cover. And we know the written dates range from October the 15th, 1913 to August the 5th, 1916. The art shop was only a few steps away from the Café de la Rotonde, a known haunt of Picasso in the period, where he sometimes sat alone, perhaps with this sketchbook. Picasso must have purchased it after his move to Montparnasse, perhaps even while he was in 242 Boulevard Raspail, which he moved to in late September 1912, up until the end of September 1913. I now turn to the drawings, their dating and their interpretation. The drawings are numbered in pencil at lower left. Most likely, these numbers were inserted during the process of settling the artist's estate. I don't know if you can see those numbers. There's one just there in that blown up one. There's one there. That's number 1, number 2. But for the rest of the sequence, the first two drawings got that the number on each page, but for the rest of the sequence, the number only appears on the lower of the two open pages. The orientation in which the drawings on facing sheets were made seems to be the same. That is, the artist drew with a sketchbook held in the same top-bottom orientation as he turned the pages. All the drawings were made in portrait, therefore, rather than landscape format, and I'm also reasonably sure that Picasso made each of the two facing pencil drawings on the open double pages at the same time, though I'm not sure whether the upper or lower sheet was always drawn first. Should we accept that the pencil numbering matches the sequence in which the drawings were made? Well, I've tested the notion a little bit that they don't, but I think the balance of probability is that Picasso started at the back, and continued to draw from page to page. Still, it does feel as if we catch ideas unaccountably mid-flow as soon as we open this sketchbook. The two opening drawings are strikingly different. On the inside cover is a mere fragment, an escapee from more familiar Cubist drawings. Below it, on the first sheet proper, is a much more legible form, an imaginary construction of a head. A long post supports a semicircular volume with an ear or two. A wooden set square, or T-square, forms a nose. Its hanging hole is a mouth. Two nails or pins are protruding eyes, and above them wing-shaped eyebrows, or perhaps eye sockets. This fictional sculpture is a thematic presence in the pencil drawings that follow, and it produces further visual ideas. Indeed, as we'll see, the abstract sign is a part of the construction's universe, after all. Sheet 45 verso has a more refined variation on the imagined construction. Now the two curves that were eyebrows are nostrils or a moustache, and the eyebrows are a folded tent-like form. The eyes are set on neat wire stalks, one a star and the other a small block or cylinder. The ear eye on the curved volume is a sharper diamond. We see that the construction is turned 3/4 on and sitting in a pictorial depth that we intuit just through the construction's organisation. The drawing on 46 recto extends the geometric sign on the cover verso, though now the upright pointing arrow becomes an arc at the end of a floating line, here crossed by a bold angled line terminating in a neat round stop. These two different lines are activated against a grid structure. There's a sense of an emerging presence, but not in a notional pictorial space of the more familiar kind we see below. We turn the page to two facing sheets that I think have a special importance in the sketchbook's developing world. Here again, on the lower sheet, we can see the most realised drawings of a fantasy construction in the sketchbook. It repeats the configuration on the previous double spread, but with the addition of modelling in depth of the central vertical plank. I use that word plank since Picasso takes care to shade it in with wood-graining striations. Again, remember how small that drawing is and think about that process. There is a dark shadow now under the folded eyebrows and a hint of depth too in the ear diamond in the semicircular volume, the construction of which is still a bit unclear. But something else happens in this version, the proliferation of various forms around the construction, forms that do not appear to exist in the same spatial reality. On the right, we can see the line and curve configuration from the previous abstracted drawing and the return of the upright arrow. The clue to all this is in the form to the left, which one gradually realises, so I'm talking about, this thing over here. One gradually realises is a frontal schematic. Oh, I've lost my place. I know what's happening. It's a frontal schematic of the sculpture, the surface of the sculpture. The arrow is the folded eyebrow. The two curves, the nostrils, and the central line the edge of the set square. These forms then propagate in the upper sheet, so that's up there. Yep. One version acquiring a strange concave crown. To the bottom right, a sort of flag and pole idea, this thing, which may be derived from the abstract-looking shapes on 46 recto, which is on the previous slide. If I whiz back and then go forward, yep. With faint hints of the eyebrow form, extends invisibly across the no man's land of perforations and stitching in the fold down to the lower sheet. So I'm saying the flagpole is, if you think of it as a flag, which it isn't, but it comes down here and it sort of appears again on the other side. This is that reflexive cubism, threading in and out of representational codes and modes in which Picasso had become so well practiced. It's a funny idea, isn't it, to cross that seam. The scalloped crown is not unique to Sketchbook 26. It belonged to the representation of musical instruments such as guitar, gas jet and bottle of early 1913. I'll show you a head later on that has it too, mind you. And the association becomes explicit on the next double page opening of the sketchbook. So here, on the upper sheet, we have an elaborate frontal elevation of the imaginary construction set against what appears to be a side elevation, suggesting the depth of various protrusions. But that drifts in pictorial imagination into a distinctive language of construction. And again, back to the abstract configurations we've seen before. The instrument below, perhaps a mandola, does not have the scalloped form in its neck, yet, this is a bit subtle. Am I making this work? Yes. Its headstock repeats the form of the construction. The jump in scale that's implied is striking. You know, it was a construction, however big we imagine it, and now it's the headstock of an instrument. It's surrounded by those same schemas, this mandola, their curved hands leaning like those on a clock or metronome. The one on the right acquires the same semicircular head shape familiar from the construction. The idea takes root on the next double sheet, with the construction starting to acquire the features of what were its frontal elevation, contagion giving it the planarity of the earlier abstract drawings in the sketchbook. Meanwhile, in the upper drawing, here on the right, yes, that's right, the construction suddenly acquires a pyramidal plinth. So we suddenly see it, here we are, it's actually sitting on a plinth, or a pedestal. To stay with that drawing for the moment, I think that together with one further on, which is on the left here in the sketchbook, that seems to propose the sculpture be self-supporting thanks to a central tube instead of a piece of wood, this is as close as this fantasy construction gets to being a plan for a sculpture. In sheet 39 verso on the left there, a few other ideas take shape. Association of what seemed an ear with a star eye, with a further plane now jutting out to the left. Now, Picasso never turned these fantasies into reality. Indeed, his Cubist sculptures after 1909 are all pretty much object-based, sculptural reinventions of still life, like those currently on view in the fabulous exhibition, Cubism and the Trompe-l'œil exhibition. No, did I say exhibition? Tradition, I meant. Sorry about that. Get the title right. Yes. Yet the nascent surrealism of these drawings, their insistence on different realities, on a reordered human visage, arguably finds expression in the late 1920s, in sculptures as well as other sketchbooks. Such delays, slow eddies in the alignment of sketchbook speculations and sculptural projects are themselves expressions perhaps of the unusual temporality of a sketchbook's universe, a thought I'll come back to. For example, in sheet 47 recto of a sketchbook Picasso completed in spring 1928, Picasso experiments with a tripod base piercing just the kind of wooden woodworker's set square that forms the nose of the fantastical construction in our sketchbook. The sculpted metal head that resulted, sitting on its tripod, does not bear a direct visual resemblance to the dreamt sculpture in Sketchbook 26. But viewed side on, as in the middle picture there, we can perhaps see how the continuity of a conceit runs over nearly 2 decades, and only finds its reality in the surreality of the late 1920s, which materialise fantasy through profound disturbances of human form. Even if Picasso did not pursue Sketchbook 26's apparent plan, we do know that he scaled up the construction idea into a more finished drawing. And note here the two, I don't know if you can see them, these two very thin lines that appear to support that funny kind of eyebrow shape, double curved thing. The dating problem for this large drawing reflects that of our sketchbook. Indeed, imagined constructions appear across 2 other sketchbooks, Cubist sketchbooks, and there's a patterning of imagination from sketchbook to sketchbook. I've got to have a drink because I'm running out of movement of my lips. Two other Cubist sketchbooks, and there's a patterning of imagination from sketchbook to sketchbook. For example, a similarly tiny sketchbook, now in the Musée Picasso, Paris, that is dated June to September 1912, includes projects for a constructed figure sculpture. On the left is a box-shaped head which has the kinked shape familiar from our sketchbook construction, as well as 2 protruding eyebrow eyes and poking tube eyes reminiscent of those star eyes on stalks. The drawing on the right has that double curved eyebrow shape, and this is why I pointed out the wires. They're there. But it does, neither is conclusive in its resemblance, I accept, but it does seem that some configurations that we find in the sketchbook Fantasias have roots in the summer of 1912, before Picasso moved to Montparnasse. Turning to another pattern of the temporal rethreading of forms, a slightly later Cubist sketchbook in the Musée Picasso, this time from spring-summer of 1913, during one of Picasso's stays in Serre, shares with ours a common motif. On the left, the heavily worked drawing in Sketchbook 26, pencil smudged with the finger to change tack from 2 eyes or brow shapes, has atop left a strange target sign between 2 bold parallel lines. Perhaps those arrow forms have just become trees, and that shape is like a distant sun. The 1930 Musée Picasso sketchbook has this sign too, found among several others that suggest guitar sound holes and strings. The sheer portability of small sketchbooks makes it difficult to know whether some drawings in our sketchbook were made in Paris or Serre, in early 1913, or in the summer or the fall. The pencil drawings from a sketchbook of 1912, that they have some resonance, may just be a function of the playing over and over again by the Cubist machine of certain conceits and inventions, the drifting of malleable formal structures capable of repetition from one configuration to another from 1912 to 1913. The uncertainty over the dates of these drawings is confirmed by the ubiquitous presence in Sketchbook 26 of the arrow and arc-tip line motif, the ones that tick across abstract sculptures and then heads in the sketchbook. They appear in a series of more ambitious paintings and drawings, maybe from early 1913, or again the summer. And I said I would show you a head with a scallop shape. There it is. Which makes me wonder, it would take a lot of proving, whether that started off as a musical instrument the other way up and then was turned that way to become a head. There are many other puzzles and inventions in pencil drawings, leading in turn to strange paths through Cubism that I don't have time to fully explore. You'll be relieved to know. Such as violins co-opting the arrow or eyebrow forms, or stars appearing as echoes of star-shaped eyes. But I want to close by turning my attention to the striking sequence of 5 pen and ink drawings that follow the pencil drawings I've been exploring. I think there's a clean conceptual break between pencil and pen series, and not just because of the change of medium, which provokes Picasso now to draw only the lower sheets. The first drawing in pen, a disturbingly skeletal sketch of a person sitting in an armchair, begs comparison with woman in a chemise in an armchair from the turn of the year 1913-14, which you can see in the Leonard Lauder galleries on the first floor, ground floor. The pink ribs to the right are certainly clearly echoed in the striations on both sides of the drawing. The sketch appears to show a spinal column and a pelvis, clavicles, as well as ball and socket shoulder joints. The apron slab stands for thighs, while the lower legs curl improbably. Is this seated figure male or female? Well, the configuration of the head resembles those 1914 melancholic Cubist men leaning on tables, an example of which I showed you earlier, suggesting the presence of a male figure. Here, dissection is applied literally, maliciously, and even masochistically to the man. What happens in the pen and ink drawings that follow is a grotesque series of heads that colonise the marks bled through from the previous drawing. In this case, fantasy tracks accidental marks in a pattern of paranoiac reconstruction, a sort of ongoing twisting of anatomy, which is easier to grasp with a sketchbook in hand than from slides. Here, the lower of the two sickle shapes in this face are the trace of the curving arm of the skeletal body of the seated male, while the shoulder joints prompt the area around the oddly hollowed cheekbones. Although some elements in this semi-constructed head are traceable to other drawings in sketchbooks, there's clearly improvisation at work that produces something a little bit monstrous. The head becomes still more fragmented in the next drawing as the arcs imprinted from the previous sheet get more pronounced, and then finally turns near abstract or into a construction with those pointillist or confetti dots on one side and a series of downturned facial features stained into existence by the previous drawing. The two curves on the left lead to a sudden jump to a familiar object, the pretend reality of a miniature violin. This violin breaks the pattern. Not only is its fake realism carefully conjured out of the bleed-throughs from the abstract head, but it also puts a stop to the mania. That it was still drawn in the same orientation, which is to say upside down, because I drew it upside down, I think, is suggested by the F-holes, which turn erroneously into elaborate bracketing marks. After this, there's only one further drawing in the sketchbook, heavily drawn in pencil. That's this one over here. The two dots that can be read as eyes are in fact bled through from the violin. Maybe the artist appropriated them in designing this mask-like head, if that's what it is, as if framed, with its short contrasting pencil strokes to the right, producing suggestions of tilting planes. Whatever came after it, if anything, is now lost, since so many sheets between it and the business annotations are torn out. A couple of thoughts to end. Our sketchbook is a fundamentally hybrid thing. even schizophrenic object. Speaking the instrumental language of Pablo Picasso's everyday business up to August the 5th, 1916, interrupted from the other side of the sketchbook by Cubist dreams and nightmares. The notes at the beginning, together with their other annotations, reveal the person Pablo Picasso's career machinations and his networks. Meanwhile, used in portrait format, the open pages at the other end always confront the artist, Picasso, as double things, doubling possibilities, top and bottom page, simultaneously visible, speaking to each other. I've been using the terms fantasy and reality throughout, very loosely, implying that there's a natural relation to this opposition in the sketchbook. Again, reality of the artist's financial dealings versus fantasy cubism. But the distinction is probably not so neat or so natural. Spelling fantasy with a psychoanalytic PH instead of an F might have taken me to Donald Winnicott's Playing in Reality, or Hannah Siegel's essays, including one titled, with a PH, Fantasy and Reality. The advantage of this would be to pull us up from too rigid an opposition between these two notions, since this sketchbook, like others kept private, takes its energy from the uncertain border between them and their interdependency. The reality principle of accounts, of course, eventually forced an eruption of naughty graffiti, as we've seen. To put the interdependency the other way round, I mentioned earlier the sense of catching the drawings midstream, so to speak, when opening the first pages. Perhaps this is because, among other things, the fantasy at work in drawing unhinges time. Yet, and here's the reality to that fantasy, it cannot do without also existing in a coherent temporal structure, inherited past, present moment, future possibilities. However powerful the imagination of new forms, elements or beings, each drawing in a sketchbook must always account for the one before and anticipate the next. Thank you. So, I went on a bit long, sorry. There is a bit of time for questions, and I should say, the good news is, if you survive this, there's a drinks reception next door, to which you are all cordially invited.